Good morning, China. Why east is west, west is east, and everywhere is China? Why does the US still call China the East when it is west of the Pacific? And China calls the US the West when it is in the East? It's a matter of history and politics, not geography. For almost 4,000 years, China's commercial and cultural exchanges with the rest of the world followed the Silk Road to the west. Few Chinese went east except the Pingtan Island folks who a few thousand years ago settled the islands of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. And for at least 2,400 years, Europeans saw China as the Far East. Ctesias, the 5th BC Greek historian and mathematician, wrote of the people of Sears, one of the ancient names for the great kingdom that bordered the great ocean far to the east. Sears meant of silk in Latin and Greek. So that suggests Sears was China. Pliny also said Sears had the world's best iron, which suggests China, because the ancient Chinese had the best iron and steel in the world. The people of Sears, by the way, were said to live very long lives, over 200 years, according to the Greek historian, philosopher, and geographer Strabo. And I believe him. Some of my neighbors are retired Xiamen University professors, and I really think at least a couple of them are 200 years old, because they were old when I moved here, and they haven't aged in 32 years. I remember years ago China having a national award for outstanding young educators, and some were in their 40s. No wonder Xiamen University did not retire me at age 60. I probably have about 90 years to go. But I digress. Ptolemy the Greek wrote in 150 AD in his Geographia, "The inhabited part of our earth is bounded on the east by the unknown land, which lies along the region occupied by the easternmost nations of Asia Major, the Sinai, China, and the nations of Ceres." So for over 2,000 years, China has been east of what we now call the West. And for Chinese, much of the world has been to the West. But why would Americans persist in calling China the East, even into the 20th century? Well, another influence was maps. Until the 1930s, even maps made in the USA showed England in the center, North and South America at the far left, and everything else on the far right. So looking at a map, everything on the planet was east of the United States. Fortunately, our little planet is a globe, so it is round. There's no fixed east or west. It is all relative. In fact, to be frank, the entire planet is quite literally China. The name for China, after all, is Zhongguo, which means middle, central kingdom. But I suspect most people on our little planet think of their own country as the center of the world. And every one of them is correct. On a globe, each place is quite literally the center of the world. So, in our new age, it might be good to remind ourselves that in the old days, when it took months to travel to far-off lands, we could speak of east and west. But today, those terms mean less than they used to, both geographically, economically, culturally, and even politically. Today, I see much of the West in the East today, in fashion, foods, technology. But I also see more and more of the East in the West, foods, fashion, philosophy, entertainment, even technology. I type on a Lenovo computer and I film with a Huawei phone. But it's hard to overcome the cultural inertia of 2,500 years. So I suspect that Chinese and non-Chinese will continue to speak of East and West for centuries to come, if East and West can quit fighting long enough to survive those centuries. So in closing, one of my favorite quotes is from our Fujian governor, who in 1891 attended a U.S. Independence Day celebration in Xiamen on July 4th. And he toasted U.S.-China friendship with a brilliant speech. Had the world heeded his wise words, we may have avoided much of the madness of the 20th century. Hopefully, we can learn in the 21st century what we failed to heed a century ago. The Fujian governor said, China, having followed its own principles of advancement during more than 5,000 years, is now compelled to change and move along European channels. It has begun to build its own steamships and railways. Its telegraph now covers every province. It has mills, forges, and foundries like those of Essen, of Sheffield, and of Pittsburgh. China is today learning that lesson in education which Europe has obliged her to learn, the art of killing, the science of armies and navies. Woe then to the world if the scholar, profiting by her lesson, should apply it in turn. With its freedom from debt, its inexhaustible resources, and its teeming millions, this empire might be the menace, if not the destroyer, of Christendom, the West. No matter what happens, it needs no prophetic gift to know that the 20th century will see at the forefront of the nations of the world, China in the East and America in the West. Well, may we pray that for the welfare of humanity, their purposes will be as peaceful and upright as today. In closing, in 1889, 3 years before the Fujian governor's 4th of July toast, Englishman Rudyard Kipling wrote a famous poem, The Ballad of East and West. The first line is often quoted, "O East is East and West is West, and never the twain shall meet." But very few people know the last 2 lines of the poem, which contradict the first line. But there is neither East nor West, border nor breed nor birth, when 2 strong men stand face to face, though they come from the ends of the earth. We talk of the American dream and the China dream. But in truth, all people have the same dream: peace, security, and a better life for their family and descendants. My dream is that we can transcend the notion of East and West and accept that we are on a globe, which puts each of us individually and as a nation at the center of the earth. Being the center offers hope, but it also requires responsibility. So dream big, but don't just daydream. As Henry David Thoreau said in Walden, if you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. Dream big and put the foundations under yours. 爱拼才会赢，爱不要加油呀！